Hey everybody, welcome to New Way Stories. My name is Jesse. I am your host, and with me, as always, Ben Salazar, our producer. Just owning the ones and twos. We've talked about that. I don't know what a ones and two
still don't know
is. I don't know, but I also don't care. That's why you do you.
Yeah, that's why I'm here.
And then Darius Giles, our other host. Again, I used to say with me as always, but he's really been dropping the ball recently. It doesn't help that I murdered him. So he's dead and will not be coming back. Dang.
He was my favorite host.
Ben, we talked about this and you were like, yeah, that sounds good. Once you commit to murdering, you can't go back.
All right, well, we're in on it now.
Well, AI, don't worry. The way AI is, we'll get him back. We'll get him back, and it'll be like he never left, and we never committed a violent crime. No big deal. What a weird way to start the podcast. We have a special guest today. His name is Josh Mendoza, and he is both a filmmaker and an author. And we're gonna get into both of those things, which is I'm super pumped for. Josh, how you doing, man?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Jesse. Ben?
Yeah.
You guys got to work on your plotting, though.
It's true. It's, yeah.
You're not supposed to tell people where the bodies are buried.
And then like broadcast it to the internet. That's, oh boy, we're really shooting by the hip here on New Way Stories.
Which is how we killed him.
The best way to be.
Well played. All right. So first question. I always do this when I enter into somebody's home. I find their bookshelf, and then I look and see what kind of titles they have on their bookshelf, so that I can judge them appropriately. I'm seeing a bookshelf behind. What's a few of the key ones there for you?
Behind me. I mean, I just read The Bladed Self this last year. I enjoyed that. And when I was a young man, Middlesex is over here somewhere. I like that book. And lately I've been read some Rob Hart recently. Warehouse was really good.
Okay.
He did The Paradox Hotel. He's a real accessible sci-fi writer.
Yeah.
He's kicking butt right now, and I really like him. And N.K. Jemisin is somewhere behind me. She did the Broken Earth trilogy, which I loved. And
nice.
Yeah, I'm just... Now, I read a lot. There's a lot of these have been read, but I also have a problem that I like to buy things. So buy books, not things, just books.
I had when I was a youth pastor, I had an office, not to brag, with a shelf, and it was like the bottom shelf just kept getting books stacked that were like my to read. But I'm like, there's no way I'm ever going to be able to read all of these. I keep acquiring books. You can acquire, easily a book a day. It's super easy, and I can't read a book a day. That's easy. It's
now
dangerous.
Everyone can acquire my book and put it on their shelf and think about reading it.
Boom. There you go. The key is to acquire it. You guys can you can acquire it, and you buy it, and read it if you have time. No, yeah, man, we'll get into that. Are those all fiction books on there? Do you dabble in any of the nonfiction as well?
Nonfiction, I like to listen to my nonfiction these days when I'm driving, and I put my eyes, my fiction. So
I like that.
Now I'm listening to a book about the Plantagenets, the first kings of England.
Nice. Okay.
Early Middle Ages.
Nice. That's century. One of the nerdier things that my wife and I do, we subscribe to something called History Hit, which is just like special podcasts and stuff and my wife is a huge medieval person. She regularly pop quizzes me on Henry VIII's wives. You got to be able to name them all. And for the life of me, I'm like, Catherine Parr. There's another Catherine in there. And then she's like, "How? I ask you this every week." Yeah, it does.
My knowledge of the wives ends with that they existed.
They existed and most died.
That might be my next book. I haven't done a Henry VIII, so.
Well, that might be. It might not even be technically medieval at that point. The Tudors, I think that ends the. This is. Mm-hmm. I'm in too deep. This is not a history podcast.
No.
You liking it, or
used to do a lot of history of Rome back in the day?
Yeah. Gladiator 2 was a movie that existed. That's about Rome. All right, now let's get into real stuff. So, filmmaker and author, movie. You had a feature film come out a few years ago, 2018. It says.
Yeah, it came out in 2018. What Still Remains.
What Still Remains.
It's a post-apocalyptic thriller that's also a coming-of-age story for a young woman. So I like to do a lot of genre mashups when I do stuff. So that's.
I feel like that is what I'm drawn to is a good genre mashup. Like the first book in, oh my gosh, why am I blanking this? Leviathan Wakes, I think is what it's called.
Find me somewhere here too.
Yeah. That's like, you were talking about like this noir detective, and it's like follows this detective that really feels like a 1940s noir movie. But then you've also got kind of some space stuff, and I like really, really dug that. Or you get Jurassic Park, which is like my favorite book and movie. You're mashing up like horror and like a few different genres in there, and it makes it awesome.
Michael Crichton's the master of that, right? But he definitely gets a little heavier science than I get. I'm more of a fantasy sci-fi kind of guy.
I think
just the work.
I like reading Crichton because I feel like I learn something, and then when I sit down to write a story, like I have it's called Space Pioneers. This kind of a big space opera thing. I take the Star Wars effect where I go, listen, it's in the future and they space travel from planet to planet. Like, just take my word for it. Yeah. I don't want to explain how it's possible. It just happens.
I'm somewhere in between. I got a little science in there, but yeah, it's definitely something for everyone. And with my movie too, it was, some of that post-apocalyptic thing, we were talking about this before we got on, is it gets into budget too. So when you're making a low budget feature film, which is still a lot of money, but not a lot of money in movie terms, right?
Sure.
You think about what can I do to make this look great and not spend any money? So going out in the woods, the LA Times described, I always think this is great. They said the movie, it's not 28 days later, it's like 28 years later. And that's kind of the idea. When I was writing, I was like, the zombies have come and gone. This is more what's left. Yeah. Right. This girl's she's only 18. It's been a long time since it happened, but she's grown up with her mom and her brother, and she has to figure out when she loses them how to make it in the world. And all she really has is legend, religion. They've been living out in the woods, just kind of living a nice existence, but very sheltered, right? And she has to come into this world, and she starts meeting people, and people are people, right? And they've all got their agendas, and that's kind of where the movie goes.
Nice. I like it. So, okay, how do you get to, what was your journey for getting to a feature film? I think we've talked to a filmmaker who does more of he's straight up commercials, right? Companies hire him to make, commercials for their products and high-end stuff, and that's a very practical way of using a creative element, right? A company hires you to do something on their website or on their social media or whatever, but for you it's you're making a creative thing. What was your journey into that? I know you started in short films.
So going way back, I started out when I went to college originally. I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a novelist, right? Okay. And I took a lot of writing classes. And in doing that, I also started dabbling in some of the film classes they had. And I started to realize that my mind was very visual. So a lot of short stories I used to write, I had a very visual bent to them. It was kind of like I was blocking camera. Yeah. But so I was like, I'm going to pivot. I want to learn how to do this movie thing. I was making some really bad short films with my buddies, right on whatever we could get back then. Yeah. Never know back then, but they were soon to be. So we were making stuff, and I was like, I want to figure out how to do this at a higher level. So I got into USC. I went to get my master's at USC, plugged in with a lot of people there and kept writing too. I mean, that was the main thing. Is I've always been a writer first. So writing the short films and dabbling in that. And when you start making better, but still bad short films, the things I was talking about start to come up. Like one of the first things I did when I got there was like, I'm going to do this sci-fi thing. And I had this cool little 5-minute sci-fi story I'd written. It was on a spaceship. But we were only allowed to spend, it was like a rule, it was class, right? It's school. So you were only allowed to spend $1,000. I'm like, oh, that's fine.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to will this into being.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a filmmaker. I'm a freaking artist, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to make this thing. And, the acting was good and the camera work was good. And the spaceship looked like a cost $1,000. And, then you show it to people and they're like, wow, yeah, that was cool. But, and people start criticizing it because I always say to people, you can't like put a chyron on the movie that says this movie only costs this much money, so please don't judge it. This
right? Yeah.
People watch it, and as the years go by and stuff gets better, they expect it to look like that too. So you have to think about your audience and where it's going to go and how they're going to react to this stuff too. So going through film school, I started to learn some of those lessons, and I did a very well received. You talk about genre mashups. It's like Jaws in the wilderness with a bear meets Deliverance, and that was the conceit of that was a monster movie with a magical bear, but there's some
also hillbillies.
Yeah, so that was a short I did that did really well, and then I wrote a feature of that, and that's done really well too, and gotten me around. So go ahead.
Little rabbit trail here. Just in your talking about the budget, this is just something that do you have kids?
I do.
You do? Excellent.
Yeah, 10 and 8.
My wife and I are like talking about having kids. Ben's wife is like a month away
from giving birth.
Congratulations.
So super exciting.
Get ready to sleep a lot.
One of the things, as most people, struggle through, like how to be a good parent, what are the things I should buy, how should I discipline my kid, all of that garbage. I wake up in the middle of the night and I go, how am I going to introduce my kids to Star Wars? I
did that
because I don't want to show them the new movies that are coming out today, or even if you go like back even further, if you want like real, nerd cred, if I'm showing them in a movie from the 40s or 50s, I'm like, this is good filmmaking. I'm nervous that if I show them a Pixar movie from 2023, that they're not going to be interested in because it looks different.
I mean, as a cinephile and also a book lover, I do both, right? I'm reading to my kids. I was reading them The Hobbit when they were very young. And I'm like, okay, we're going to do Lord of the Rings. Because they were like, I don't remember, like 6 and 4. And I did read them the first Fellowship. And they liked it, but like they were scared. And I was like, really, this is scaring them, but like, makes sense, right? But so like pivoted away from that. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to terrify my children. This is from the kid whose dad let him watch Jaws when he was like 5. And
you go, you barely even see Bruce. It's fine.
Was afraid to go in the pool for a long time. But and introducing Star Wars, I mean, I'm older than you guys. So like when I was growing up, I like burned out those VHS tapes. Because all I have were the original trilogy until I was in high school. And then the first Phantom Menace came out. So, I mean, it's interesting though, because perspective, I mean, I like those prequels, but I'm one of those guys who's like, the original, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Kids, we've done the prequels, we've done the Clone Wars, we've done Rebels as they've gotten old. We've done it all. So, but they love the prequels. You know what? I love them too now. It's like, because they're kids movies. They're meant for kids. Right? So, but I do think you got to make sure they're old enough to like it, because you don't want to show them something and they're like, I don't like that.
Totally, right? You show them A New Hope or Empire when they're like 4 and they're like,
it's not going to apply. Right?
They're not really getting it. You're like, no, Empire is like a brilliant movie. Why don't you get this, kid? It is crazy though, the generation, and we're really off track here, but that's okay.
We told
I'll
you
go
that
anywhere you want to go.
No, I was talking to like a 17-year-old and I was like, what's your favorite Star Wars movie? And he was telling me, I think he was giving me, which one was it? It was one of the ones from the newest bunch. And I was like, what? Like, that's definitely the wrong answer.
But it's not, though. I mean, here's my thing about art. I mean, I don't know. We've gone down this rabbit hole with the internet, and people like want to tell you everything that's wrong with everything. I mean, you know, when you're making stuff and you think about things, you talk about water cooler moments, right? Where it's like, well, this is because you run into problems no matter what, no matter your budget, no matter what you're doing, and you got to decide: is this going to make someone stop watching the movie, or is this something like when they stand around and talk about it later? They may be like, oh yeah, that was weird. Like, but now, like with these big things like Star Wars or Marvel, people talk about it for years.
Yeah.
It becomes like, well, yeah, I mean, there's still movies. I mean, there's still only a couple hours long. You can only do so much stuff in so much time, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, always, you talk about Marvel, the comic books are always going to have more. And, you know, people with Star Wars, they're like, of my generation, are like, oh, I grew up on those expanded universe books, which I did.
Yeah.
And they're all mad that they're gone now. And it's like, well, yeah, but they were just stories. And now they're telling new stories. And you should be happy you get new stories.
Right.
Like,
yeah, totally.
But to me, to just go like so negative all the time just gets tiresome. It's just like, you like it, you don't like it, you know, move on to the next one.
Yeah, it is true. I mean, it is weird how like Star Wars particularly has, you know, it has become a religion, and then you know a new movie comes out and you go, well, you've just committed blasphemy, and you're going to hell, J.J. Abrams.
There's been a couple divergent sects of the religion too now.
Right.
People who are like the Holy Trilogy, the Holy Trinity, the original trilogy versus the
the Apocrypha of the sequels.
The Rey, the people who will never worship at the altar of Rey.
That's right. That's going to be wild in 500 years, where it's like you will not believe how many sects of Star Wars fans there are.
Oh, I know. There's a lot. Well, but you know, that's why they have billions of dollars too. Which is that's a good problem to have.
Yeah, no kidding. And then again on the budget front, when you're talking about that, like Terminator, like the first Terminator, and it's funny to hear James Cameron talk about budget restraints in hindsight, but the first Terminator really, again, didn't have that big of a budget, and he's like, well, how can I make this like a scary monster and not show that it's like a scary, and so they have like one scene where he like has the Terminator skeleton, like his face is off, and it's not like it's not great, but it's also 1984.
Well, but it was great when it came out.
Well, I mean, that's what I was saying. Like 1984, that's insane. Yeah. And I think it still, to a level, holds up today. Like, I mean, the Terminator movie as a whole holds up.
It's a great movie.
Yeah.
Well, Cameron came from the B movies. I mean, he did Roger Corman movies. I mean, so he knew how to work on a budget, right? And he was some weird low budget things that he elevated, right? And there are people who came out of that who became great filmmakers, and there are people who didn't make it. And I think there's a skill there too. But I mean, that's the Jaws thing too, right? They were going to have that shark in like every scene, and then it sank. Yeah. And, oh shoot! I guess we got to figure out how to do this. And they use music and camera, right? Yeah. But that movie was scary because they used music and camera. If you'd seen that shark at the very beginning, that girl, I mean, it would have just been like, all right, well, totally. There it is. Is the wondering where it is, right?
Yeah, I do think that there's a ton of lessons, right, to cut your teeth when you go, okay, how can we get around this budget problem? Like, it would be great if we could just pay a makeup artist, you know, $1 million to do whatever, but you got to like figure it out creatively.
Yeah, well, like on my movie, and you do it in script first. I mean, you sit down, you write the script you think a little bit about budget if you know you're going to make it, but you don't get too lost in the weeds because you can always rewrite it, right? Yeah. And then you bring on your producers and you start talking, all right, well, we got we got $1 million, right? I'm just making up numbers here.
Yeah.
Like, so how do we do this? And you break it down, and then you're like, well, we got to change some things. So you change them there. And then inevitably too, when you start shooting on the fly, things will change too. It might be money, and it might be the reality of the world. Like on my movie, I had this cool little scene where there was going to be like a pit trap and people fell in the pit, and there's a whole thing about getting out of the pit, and it was going to be really neat. And up until the day before we were going to shoot that, we were shooting that.
Yeah.
And then like I was shooting other stuff, and the producers pulled me aside. It's like, hey, so we're over here trying to dig this hole, and the dirt, the ground's softer than we thought it would be, and blah blah. Long story short, not sure we could put an actor in there and have it be safe. And one of the great things about USC is they really emphasize safety, and I mean, there's nothing more important, I think, than it's make believe. It's supposed to be fun, and there are people making these things, because you read about these people who like put people on railroad tracks they don't have control of, and just things like that. That is just like, to me, is asinine and foolish.
Yeah,
like people first, people's lives. It's just a movie.
It is just a movie.
Within those realms, make the best movie possible. So we had to pivot and do something different. And when you don't have as much time, you pivot as quickly as you can, right? Because you're also shooting the movie. It's not like, all right, well, we're gonna stop for 3 days and do some rewrites here. It was like, well,
you have a crew that like you have to like keep going. I think it's from Tora Tora Tora. There's a clip of a plane just like going off, and in the movie it looks great. You're like, wow, this is insane. But like the guy lost control of the plane and almost like hit a dozen people. And you're like, okay, that was not well thought out as a shot. Yeah. Like, sure, you guys got a little lucky and okay, died, but that was close. You don't want that on a movie shoot. You want safety. Okay, cool. So you were making short films. So, got out of there, was writing features, pitching, and just wanted to make something. I think that was the thing, is like, in hindsight, maybe making that a few more shorts with some more money and just staying in school and writing it off your taxes wouldn't have been a bad idea. But when you're younger, you're like, hey, I'm going to go chase this thing. Yeah. And I got there, obviously, but it was just bartering, finding people to invest, finding gap financing. And that just continues to get harder and harder. I mean, in the 90s, before my time too, I mean, you could sell $5 DVDs in a bin and make $1 million, right? Like it's a couple 100,000 people walking to Best Buy and buy your B movie, and that was more than your budget, right? You made a lot of money. Well, the streaming world has changed a lot of that, and a lot of people watch them, but you don't make as much money per watch now. So there's the financing just keeps shrinking and shrinking. And I think the detriment of films too, because they're not making as many movies as they used to. So in the old days, I mean, you could get some jobs on some of these mid-tier B movies that would be in the movie theater, right? And would make money. I always bring up Rain of Fire because I always loved that movie, and wasn't obviously an A movie, but had some future A-list actors in it too. And I mean, I remember going to see that in the movie theater, like they don't do those anymore. It's like, if it's on a tentpole, it's probably not getting made, right? Yeah, for sure. So and it's a challenge when you're an indie person. I mean, you just have to find a way to make things, and you have to then live with that budget. Yeah. On the streaming front, I probably could have looked this up via Google, but I'll ask you instead. How does that, like, say like these random, like Tubi is becoming bigger and bigger. Is that like where the quote unquote money is that you like sell the rights to Tubi to make a Tubi original? I mean, if you can get in the door before you even make it, Netflix will greenlight your movie, right? And give you money. I mean, that's a home run. If you're doing it, like I did it more like the other way around, right? Where you find investors, go make the movie because you want to get in the door to then one day get to pitch those movies and have like something. If you're just going, you're like, I have a cool script. I mean, once in a while, they're like, yeah, I'll buy that script. You probably won't get to direct it. Right. You have to have a movie to show. But like the people who get that
shot with nothing behind them or few and far between.
Yeah, for sure.
So you read about the one person who did it, and you're like, I'll do that too. But even that person, you didn't read about all the no's they got and all the
totally. So, I think too, people don't understand like the Duffer Brothers with like Stranger Things. They go, oh, these guys came out of nowhere and they made Stranger Things. You go, well, they also actually had like a series on Fox that did like pretty decent, and like they've been making stuff and have been in the industry. And while you don't know their name, like industry people know their name.
And I mean, I got a lot of scripts that, go around and they get pitched, and, people sell things, and you never see them though. And they sit on, so you look at someone's IMDb and you're like, oh, they made one movie, or they made two movies, but you don't know if they actually only made one movie or if they're still out there chasing it. And then obviously with the world we live in, pandemic changed a lot of things. Then the strike changed a lot of things. So I mean, that movie came out in 2018. So I was taking a lot of meetings, maybe going to make something like 2019. We were writing it. 2020, it's like, all right, we're going to do this thing. We have the money, doing it. Pandemic happens. All right, let's pump the brakes. Let's see how we're going to make this movie with the pandemic. Yeah. And by the time we get through all that money had gone away. So it's like, okay, well, let's pivot to something different. And then the strike. All right, let's pivot this. And now pivoting again. So you always have to be creating and doing stuff, but you have no control over outside sort of things too.
Which I think takes us, potentially, this is my hunch, takes us to writing a novel.
Well, actually, before the pandemic, my book, so the movie was coming out. I'd made it. We were in post, and I had the idea for what became Shadow of the Eternal Watcher. Yeah. But I knew it was going to just be this big sci-fi adventure. And I just knew that script would be expensive and maybe be a good calling card and I could pitch it, but I already had those, right? So maybe I'll get back to my roots, write the book and try to get it out that way. Naively thinking, once I write it, it'll just come out. And there's a whole other side to bookmaking too. It takes a long time. Yeah, for sure. But I think too, when you go pitch a lot of times, you go in, you're like, oh, I got this great script. And they're like, oh, yeah, I liked your script. Let us know what you do next. Wish you had some IP to this. IP is intellectual property. So also just writing the book, who knows? You don't know what's going to happen, right? I mean, totally. But now I have my own intellectual property too. So like when I go pitch that, and it's just another feather in the cap too. And also just from a personal goal standpoint, I always wanted to write books, and I've gone back and done that, and I'm going to keep writing books and more scripts too. Now, Shadow of the Eternal Watcher is going to be first in the series. Are we looking at doing a big 12-parter trilogy? What are we looking at? I imagined it originally as a trilogy, maybe a duology, but probably a trilogy, and then wrote it with the ending. I won't ruin it, but definitely left it open, but wrote a book that could stand on its own. Too. Yeah. So that I'm working on the second one now. So sick. I think that is, for me, I need to read a book that can stand on its own, because I do read a fair amount, but like when I get into a book, it's a commitment, right? Like it's going to take me 2 or 3 weeks to read a book, maybe a month if it's a little longer. And if I'm committing to, like, listen, I love Sanderson. He's the man. But I read the first one, The Way of Kings. It's like 1,000 pages, and I go, I love you, bro, but like I'm not doing it. Like I'm not doing your other 10,000 page books, like, because I don't want my. He's great, but I'm with you. Yeah, sometimes they can be a bit long. I just don't want my adult life committed to one fantasy series. You just got. He doesn't have the George R.R. Martin problem, but you also wonder about time, right? it marches forward for all of us. It's like, well, I hope you get to the end of all these things. He's young now, but I mean, he's got a lot of years of books out of him too, right? He does produce at a crazy clip. He does. He's out of the world. Okay, cool. I never finished answering your question with the streaming. Oh, if you want to hear the answer to that. Yeah. What you do with an indie movie is you kind of piecemeal together rights, right? So like when you're not on Tubi original, you're like, okay, well, let's go out to Netflix. And like my movie ran on Netflix for a year, and they essentially license it for a year, and you get a check in the mail.
Gotcha.
The producer, and you distribute it. And then you go to the next one. So it's on like iTunes. It's on iTunes, just, Apple TV.
Apple Music. Yeah, right.
On Amazon Prime, and you can buy it, and then it will like stream for free, and they're licensing that, and then it goes away. And that's why they go away, because they only sign a year contract, and they're on to Netflix is like, on to the next thing. We don't need to leave you on here.
Totally.
And then it was on Paramount Plus, and then it was off Paramount Plus. So they kind of, and every time you do the next one, you get less money because it's already been on something else too. So that's how that works. And
gotcha.
And every time someone buys it, like on Apple TV or Amazon Prime, you get like $1, right? Whatever you're getting a percentage. So it's like you split it with the distributor, and you have whatever deal you have with them. You're splitting it with the company that bought it. The half comes in, and then whatever your split is that you just negotiate with your distributor, you get 70 or 50 or 60, whatever that is. And that's how that works too. So, I mean, obviously everyone who watches it, you're getting a couple bucks. You guys sell a lot. You got to have a lot of clicks, right?
Yeah, for sure. Okay.
Yeah. So sorry, I wanted to finish that
it's super interesting because I definitely am like, I was born in 90 and love, I grew up on VHSs and DVDs, and like, I also love just like having the physical copy of something. So like, I want to buy the movie. And when it's not like when it's not a Netflix original or whatever, it's kind of hard to find some obscure movies on streaming, right? You're like, I'm paying $150 for a dozen different streaming platforms, and I can't find The Terminator. Like I want, and that's not even an obscure movie, right? Or The Predator. Like I want to watch The Predator sometimes. That's all I'm saying. And
I agree with you.
And unless I buy
no one can ever take it from you as long as you have the device to play it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in theory, they could be like, oh, we don't. All those things you bought and you thought you owned, they're gone now. Like,
totally.
It hasn't happened yet, but it could, right?
Well, and I think it does.
We're not going to do that anymore.
I think it has happened with like a lot of, again, like for film nerds, there are movies that came out in the 40s and 50s and 60s that a movie company can say, hey, we're not going to like put that on a streaming platform because it's not politically correct. It's not like fill in the blank, like this guy's in blackface or whatever. And I'm like, I'm not here to say it's correct that they did that, but I also can like watch a piece of history and like judge it and enjoy it accordingly. It's like one of my favorite episodes of Community. I don't know if you've ever seen the show.
I have, yeah.
There's the
D&D episode.
The D&D episode, exactly. Yeah. And they're like, well, Chang is in blackface. It's like, well, I don't actually think he is. That's a gross understatement of the joke. Like a
dark elf, right?
Right. Yeah. It's hilarious, but like for a while they took that episode off of like all the streaming episodes. I'm like, this is like one of the best episodes of Community. And so, but if you have it, if you bought it, you can enjoy the physical copy without a streaming platform telling you what you can and can't enjoy.
Exactly. Yeah, I hear that too. And it's nice just to have the physical copy, and that's true of books too. I like to buy books, and you talked about my bookcase behind me. I mean, I've tried to do the Kindle Nook thing, and I've read a few on there, but I like to just have it in my hand. I think it's and they're, like you said, they're great decoration too. It's fun to put them on the bookshelves.
I'm into it. Okay, so writing process. You've got. I'm assuming there's some carryover from writing scripts and writing a novel. Obviously, two different beasts. Like, I don't know if you got word count off the top of your head, but like a script is like what, 30,000?
15 to 20,000 words.
Right, and then your novel is 80,000. Right, so
80,000 is like 80,000 will get you about a 300-page book, give or take.
Yep.
Depending on your dialogue versus if you just read a lot of block description, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's like 4 or 5 scripts into a book, right? And then, a lot of people are like, oh, I'm going to write a script. And, in a script, a page is about a minute. That's how you count a script. So you're like, oh, I'm going to write a movie. So it's 120 pages. Well, no one's going to read your 120-page script. I mean, usually they'd be like 90 to 100, unless you're just like killing it or you're famous and you can do whatever you want.
Right.
Right. But it's interesting because scripts are so structured, right? So it's like first act, 20 to 30 pages. You need a point of attack in that. And then your second act, all right, about halfway through, I need my midpoint, and then I need my falling action to bring me inevitably towards my conclusion in my third act. So you have to learn all that stuff so that you can change it and break the rules. And then going into a book, I mean, books have structure too. And I think people forget that sometimes.
Yeah.
And write whatever they want, right? So, and that's the trap is like, oh, well, now I have so many words. I write 150,000 word book and it'll be 600 pages and people are going to love it. It's going to have all these things. And most people are going to say, oh, I'm not going to read that, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, for me, it was always about, I mean, I like plot and I mean, character first. I'm always about character, and that you learn that as a screenwriter too. It has to be character.
Yeah.
So in the book, it was like character, and then I want things to happen to them.
Yeah.
And I want action, and I want things to turn the page. So I thought of each chapter as like a scene in my script. What's my in? What's my out? And what happens to them? What's the journey? You can't just have a scene. You know, sometimes you read a book and they sit around and talk, and nothing happens, and it's like, yeah, it was some great talking, but like you have to drive the story forward, right? So always thinking about driving the story forward, and you can always go back too. And that's my other thing too, is get words on page, fix it later. Yeah. Keep moving forward, get it fixed. Cause you know, a lot of times people get lost in like, oh, I got to like perfect the first 10 pages or 30 pages. Cause the beginning's got to be great. Yeah. Right. But you don't know what's going to happen at the end. Even if you plot it out, if you're a big plotter and you've got like your 75 page outline for your page book or your 90 page script, and, you know, you go and you're like doing your outline, you might change it as you go. Cause sometimes things happen and you have a better idea, or characters start talking cause you let them, and you're like, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I'll follow that. Yeah. So if you've obsessed so much about the beginning, you may never get to that part at the end that you're going to change. And you also may change that beginning anyway. So I think getting through, going back and fixing. Obviously, that's harder with a book, and a book's more of a marathon, right? For sure. I think just setting realistic goals too. Like, you know, Stephen King, I mean, he's crazy, but he writes like 2,000 words a day, right? So you could write a book in 40 days. But I'm always like, you know, try to write 500 words. And if you got a job, like, hey, what about 3 times a week? Could you write 500 words? That's 15 words, or 4 times a week for easy math, right? Well, you get 2,000 words. Well, 40 weeks, you'd have a book.
It's crazy that, like, I think, man, when it comes to novels, it's something like 40% or 50% of Americans like have the thought like, oh, I'd like to write a novel. Like it's a huge number. Because
everyone knows how to write technically, right?
Right.
Like,
yeah, exactly.
Learn how to read and write. So everyone thinks they can do it, and maybe you can, but I do think that's where that stack comes from.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Yeah, they've written in high school, right? They go, okay, I've got this. I know how to work a laptop. But then, you know, you set out to do it. And like you said, if you don't have a little bit of the know-how of getting from point A to point B in a scene, you start writing. And I was guilty of this. Like I started and stopped just like 6 terrible novels. And then I finally like got one that was still terrible at the end. But I was like, this is at least like workable. And for me, I actually, I kind of thought of it as like a serial, or I was like, okay, if I'm going to do, like, if this were to be a full series, right? Like you said, each chapter is a scene. For me, I was like, each chapter is an episode. And then for me, I was able to like kind of frame that in my mind a lot easier compared to setting out and being like, I'm going to write like Tolstoy, like this meandering war and peace.
It's like anything in life. If you say I'm going to run a marathon and then you go try to run a marathon,
you peter out a few pages in.
You have to practice.
Yeah,
and you have to get better. And I think that's true of writing too. You have to, you know, hopefully it's not 10 bad novels, like you say, 8 bad novels, but you have to write the bad stuff too. And it's true of filmmaking too. You have to make the bad shorts, and you have to make the the bad things. And you sort of hit it too with books. 50%, 40% want to make a book, and it's true of movies too now. I mean, obviously, phones have made it much easier. The entry level with our laptops and the technology we have on there to go in and cut things together is easier. So there's a lot more noise.
Yeah.
And some of that stuff's great and some of it's terrible, right? And you might make something great, but you have to get through the noise to find people to notice it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it doesn't matter that it's great if no one ever sees it or no one ever reads it, right?
I mean, when were you in college? When were you making your short films?
I was at USC like 2009 to 2012.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. So, I was making these dumb videos for my youth group about, 2008, 2009. And, I'm not saying that they are professional by any means because they're not. But even just that, to show a 2-minute, like, stupid clip to my youth group, I had to like record on a camera and then upload it into Final Cut. And it was like this full process of uploading it, rendering it, and then editing and putting all that for a pretty terrible 2-minute clip. Took me like 3 hours. Like I had to, of just the like editing process. That's not even like coming up with the idea and shooting it and all that stuff. And now you're like, selfie, boom, 1 million people have seen it. And you go, wow, you put zero thought into that. Amazing.
Like high school, college, when I used to make stuff, I mean, that's like late 90s, early aughts. I mean, and you thought you had a lot of technology, but it's grown by leaps and bounds in the last 25 years. So definitely
late 90s. You still splicing film together for editing?
Now I do remember when I went to USC, so 2009, right? We were like some of the last ones. We still had a class where we learned how to load film into a camera.
I love it.
I mean, people are like, that's what we're doing. We're filmmakers. But at the same time, they didn't have the moviola in there to like cut the thing together like it was 1975 either.
Yeah.
We still have Final Cut. So you still have to scan it and put it on. Yeah. And, Christopher Nolan can do it, but most of us don't get to shoot on film because it's cost prohibitive, right?
Well, even like, speaking of DVDs, I was watching a DVD commentary of M. Night's Lady in the Water, and he's like, yeah, we did like half of this on film and like cutting it the old way. And then he goes, and then we just ran out of like time and money. Like we had to do the rest digitally. I'm like, okay, even M. Night, Yeah,
and that was when he had money too.
Right, that was when he was still like considered a success.
That's the thing though, is even when you have 50 million, 100 million, I mean, you still have to budget these things. I mean, because you could easily spend 200 million if you wanted. Like you can always spend more money. And that's the thing about movies. No matter what you have, you'll always find a way to fill the time and spend the money. So if you're like, oh yeah, we've got so many days, like when you have 18 days to shoot something and you're trying to make a feature film, you're always like, I wish we had 21 or 20. And then you get those extra days, maybe you tag them on, and it's not enough time. Yeah. I mean, you always find ways to waste it.
Yeah, for sure.
You set up lights. The work fills the time. There's no doubt.
All right. So getting back to the book, because we'll spend the last 12 minutes pushing the book. So where did you come up with the idea? And then I guess maybe how did that transform? How different is it from the original idea? I'm always just interested in the creative process.
Yeah. I grew up, I used to sit in the bookstore and read all the sci-fi books. So I've always been a sci-fi guy, and I've watched a lot of Star Trek and Twilight Zone. So, to me, it was just like an homage to that kid who loved those things, wanted to do it in the sci-fi world. But my original idea was the detective. What became chapter 1 is like him driving down the road drunk to his favorite watering hole to take a case he doesn't really want to take. Right. Yeah. And I just, in my mind, I was like, okay, well, I love that idea of this kind of flawed detective. It's classic trope. And I'm like, well, how do I make that different? How do I make it something you've never seen? And I had that sci-fi idea, and I thought it would be a fun adventure for me to try to write a very grounded, gritty, noir, modern day LA, work in the streets, kind of ambulance chaser detective, right?
Yeah.
Becomes by the end this epic sci-fi space opera that you didn't even know. He doesn't know it existed. So we get to like go on the journey with him and learn about it. And then just trying to do different spins on the multiverse and trying to make it unique and different from some of the things we're used to seeing too. And when I set out to write it, I mean, the multiverse is kind of be blown up, right?
Yeah.
Like the original versions of this was kind of predates that. I mean, obviously it was big in comic books, but I mean, I was always thinking like, I was going way back before my time even. I was thinking like Mir from Star Trek. And I was well, I don't know different than that. Yeah. So that was the original idea. And then obviously as the book unfolds, you go back, you change it, you tweak it. And I mean, writing a good book is kind of making it seem like all the accidents that happened along the way were planned from the beginning.
Right. Yeah.
It's going back and trying to just make it seem like you had the plan the whole time.
Yeah. I thought about all of this the entire time. You're welcome.
Yeah. Why did some people get lost in that though? They're like, no, I love that twist. What's my twist going to be? Well, sometimes you think, okay, well, this will be my twist. So you start doing stuff. And then you like introduce like a MacGuffin or something. And you're like, well, what if this happened? And then also you have a better twist. But like you wouldn't have ever thought of it if you hadn't started writing the book, right? So, I mean, sometimes the journey of writing gives you better ideas. And then you're like, oh, well, if that happens, you're on page 250, right? You're like, no, I have to go back and put it here. And you lay the breadcrumbs to lead them there. And it looks like this brilliant idea, right?
Yeah.
It's a brilliant idea, but you have to make it seem like it was.
They was playing the whole time. That's with Space Pioneer. That was definitely something that happened. I killed off a character in the first draft and was like, what if we don't do that? And then like had to go back and rewrite a whole bunch of stuff and then change the ending. And but also for me, I am a huge collaborator, so I like brought on this editor and we were meeting weekly, and him and I, when it was just like, all right, this is my idea, and then he goes, well, what about this? And you go, oh, that's sick. Yeah. Well, what about this? And then like after 7 or 8, what about this? You go, oh, this is the one that's a combination of both, and I think that happens solo, like when you're writing a book solo as well, where you go, oh, here's the idea, and then you kind of start.
Well, when you write a book, I mean, a movie obviously is very collaborative, right? The script originally, it's just you, but you get readers too. And I think that's true of a book too. You get beta readers, you get editors, and they give you ideas. And sometimes they're bad ideas, right? But maybe there's something wrong with the book or the script. So they say, oh, I didn't like when XYZ happened on page 75. I think you should do this. You probably shouldn't do that.
Right.
Say, well, there's a problem here. What don't they like? How can I, as the author, how can I, as the writer, fix that? And maybe you don't think it's a problem, and that's okay too. But like, I think sometimes people get very stubborn. Oh, it was my idea that I'm going to stick to this.
Yeah.
You should listen to the objections and try to figure out how to make it better. Right? And how do you fix the problems? It may not even be a problem. It might just be an idea, but it might be a better idea.
Yeah.
And then, but you as the author have to make it your own and stay true to like your own creative process too. But that doesn't mean you don't change it, right?
Yeah. I love that. I always forget who said it, but like, you got to be willing to kill your darlings, right? You go, don't be married to an idea, like, because if you do, that will like sink you.
And that's movies too. Like you kill darlings when you write the script, you kill darlings when you're shooting it sometimes, and then you kill them when you're editing. Yeah. Right. Like, so there's a lot of places to lose things in a movie. And sometimes in a movie, the fun thing about movies is sometimes you can put things together that weren't meant to be. And you're like, wow, that's amazing. Or shots that were in different scenes, you can put them somewhere else and they work. And it's like, wow, that wasn't what I planned, but this makes it seem so much better. Yeah. And I think with books too, I mean, I remember I knew this one chapter was just too long, and I'd gotten that note before. So, and when I started trimming it, but I didn't like rewrite it. I just started thinking like, well, what if this happened right here? And all of a sudden you lose about a page, and these 2 paragraphs that were never meant to marry together, you tweak them a little, and it's like, wow, that's actually much better writing.
Yeah, for sure.
You never know.
I love that. So when you were talking about the beginning of the book, it really is a brilliant idea when you're talking about like science fiction or fantasy that is this much larger world. And, I will be the first to say that I'm not the smartest person, and you throw me in a huge fantasy world.
I'll be the second person.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. And there's just, I think two aspiring fantasy and science fiction authors, they get a little lost in the exposition where you go like, I got to explain everything because here's this huge world that's out there and I want you to understand every little thing that's happening. Yeah. But then your character is like normal Earth and starting to figure stuff out. And so as a reader, you're figuring it out at a palatable rate along with your main character, which I think is awesome.
Yeah. And that was kind of my thought process too, is I wanted it to be accessible. If you love sci-fi, I wanted you to still like this. Obviously there's the hardcore people who are probably going to be like, I wish it was, that's true of everything. No matter what you do, you can't please everyone.
Yeah.
But like, you have to think about your audience though too. So I wanted it to be broad, but still fun for like the diehards. And, originally in writing it, my idea was it's just a detective novel and then becomes sci-fi. And as going through it, I eventually did do a prologue that kind of sets up the sci-fi, but I didn't want to get lost in how everything works. And like you just said, I think moving the story forward, a glimpse of this bigger world, it exists. And now we're in this other world. And you're like, why are we in a different perspective doing this now? And that's kind of plays into the mystery, I think, in my novel of the actual detective story, which I think is kind of fun too. Is like, not only is he solving a mystery in the book, but also his existence is kind of the mystery too. And so I like dichotomy as well.
That's awesome, man. Man, Josh, this was so much fun. Thank you for taking the time with us.
My pleasure.
Sorry, say that again.
I just said my pleasure, Jesse.
Oh, excellent. You cut off just a little bit. We really like to start and end the show with some kind of awkward back and forth. It's really what we do best. Yeah. Shadow of the Eternal Watcher by Josh Mendoza. Amazon, is that like the easiest place?
It's on Amazon. It's on Barn. It's wherever you like to get books. If you have an indie bookstore, you can go tell them to get it and they can get it. And it's at Barnes & Noble, but Amazon's the main one. And obviously it's on Audible. Not obviously, it is on Audible. It's on or wherever you like to get your audiobooks.
Well, so I'm going straight self-pub indie, and I have been kicking around the Audible route. Did you guys hire an actor, or did your publisher do they have that, or was it more of a personal?
And you can do it as a self-published guy too. I mean, it costs money, right? But it's like making a movie. I mean, we had like 7 or 8 people, like the final cut of the auditions, and I got to listen to them read a chapter and then pick the best one, and then he ran with it, and he gives a great performance. And everyone's always like, did you read it? And I'm like, no, I'm a filmmaker. So I was going to say, people do it.
Did you like direct, or did your like publishing company allow you to have a little bit more heavy hand because of your experience?
And I didn't want to, I'm not heavy handed when I direct either. I think you hire the actor because you think that they represent what you do, and you give them adjustments when you audition people to see that they can do it. Right.
Yeah.
And then this is my opinion, but you as the director are kind of the shepherd to let them have a safe space to do something interesting, do something cool in front of the camera, read your words. And if they have a hard time saying something, like I'm not like, if they're like, could I say this instead? As long as it's not going to ruin the plot, I say, sure. Right? I think like letting actors act is very important. And I felt that way about the audiobook too. So I picked the guy who nailed what I imagined the tone to be, so that he got it when I got the first version, it was 95% of the way there. And then I just had mostly just like, say this word like this instead of that. It was like 40 of those. It was, I was really impressed.
That's awesome. Well, I think that plays into the collaboration, right? Is that your writer, director, whatever, and then you bring your actors in, and they bring in yet another perspective from an acting perspective.
Telling an actor, I want you to do this. I want you to turn like this, and like really be angry there. And they get lost in their head, and then they're not acting.
Yeah.
You can be like, hey, that was a great. Let's do it again. That was a 5. Let's do a 7 intensity, or instead of that, attack them. You give them a verb and just let them go with that.
Yeah.
And sometimes actors will be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. You just gotta adapt to like who your actor is too.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So
Shadow of the Eternal Watcher, Audible, Amazon,
yeah,
Noble,
do it. If you're in Yakima, where we're recording, go to Inklings, your local bookstore, and we'll put in all the links in the description. But Shadow of the Eternal Watcher, Josh, man, thank you so much for the time, and I'm pumped to get into the book.
Awesome. Thanks, Jesse. Thanks, Ben. I hope you enjoy it. I really appreciate being on the show.
Yeah. All right, man. We will. Who knows? Maybe we'll talk to you on the next release.
Yeah. Well, I'm writing it, so I'll be back.
Boom. Love it. All right, guys. You can subscribe as well to New Way Stories wherever you get your podcasts. Tell your friends about it. Write letters, smoke signals, all of the most effective ways to communicate to tell them about our pod. And we will see you next week.